January has brought mostly welcome rain to the southeast, decreasing the drought severity in most areas, creating some flooding in others. Chris, Jeff, and I will talk about this in the January edition of the Water Resources Outlook. So, for our spring flood outlook for the southeast, which basins have the greatest risk? And we'll talk a little bit about the long-term versus the short-term drought. Where will the drought increase and decrease as we go through the rest of the Water Resources Outlook?
So who has seen the rain and snow over the past 30 days? Well, the most significant area of precipitation has been over areas from southern Mississippi across southern Alabama into a good part of Georgia and western South Carolina. This area has seen 4 to 8 inches above normal, as shown in the purple shades there over the past 30 days. Most of this fell in a couple of storms that moved across the area, one just after the new year and one just recently on the 22nd and 23rd. Both these events sent rivers across these areas to well above their banks. Elsewhere, most areas have been near normal, and the Florida Peninsula has been a bit below normal. Now that we begin the new year, and this is the first Water Resources Outlook for our office for 2017, looking back at 2016, we see dry weather and drought dominated the heart of the southeast there, with the large precipitation deficits shown by the red colors there across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and into the upstate portions of the Carolinas. Hurricane Matthew kept eastern parts of the Carolinas in the above normal range for the year, as you see with the purple colors. So overall, we see Georgia and Alabama had a very dry year, 9th driest for Georgia and 11th driest for Alabama. Temperature-wise, warm weather dominated across the entire U.S., but Georgia ended up having a record warm year in 2016. This did not help with the summer dry period and a drought that was growing by late summer into fall. As far as stream flows, looking at the 28-day average stream flows, we see most areas are near normal, with above normal flows across southern Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, and western parts of Georgia. Many headwaters in North Georgia and northern Alabama and upstate South Carolina are still running below normal. The Florida Peninsula is seeing most rivers near to below normal, but keep in mind stream flows are generally low this time of year with the dry season.
Now that we have seen the rain and what it has done to the rivers, here's an objective look at the drought using the Palmer Drought Index. The mountains of Georgia and into the Carolinas remain dry, and that is reflected in the reservoirs at the top of some of those basins not recharging very much yet. We talked more extensively last month about the reservoirs, and we'll do the same thing during our February Water Resources Outlook. Right now, there are still a lot of mixed signals between long and short-term drought. Now Jeff can show us the drought monitor and give us a little perspective on how far we have come since the peak of the drought.
Okay, thanks Todd for showing us the Palmer Drought Index information. So what does this look like for the drought monitor? Here's the latest drought monitor, actually just released today, and we see the extreme drought conditions have shrunk considerably over the past weeks. Only about 1% of the southeast region now in this extreme drought category. In fact, taking a look back to about Thanksgiving, we see how fast we have improved. We see a large part of Alabama and Georgia in extreme drought back in November, but the winter rains have helped alleviate drought conditions since then. And this has really been the case across the country as we see very little extreme drought or greater. Actually, no areas are reporting exceptional drought across the country, the first time since March 2011. Taking a look at the river flood climatology, we are in that time of year where river flooding is typical across most of the southeast. We get winter rains from the active jet stream, and the ground conditions are optimum for runoff. We are in about week 4, and we see that the river flood events tend to be on the increase now through mid-March across most of the southeast, except the Florida Peninsula. So again, river flooding is typical, and we will see it as we are seeing it now, but the bigger question is, will we see more or less than typical? So stay tuned to the show as Todd will give the spring river flood outlook, answering the question, will we see more or less river flooding than typical?
At this time, we're not expecting much precip across the southeast U.S. for the next 7 days. Let's take a look at the setup. We're starting the period behind a cold front with high pressure across the area. This is expected to continue through the weekend. We're expecting a cold front to move into the area on Monday, and another front later in the midterm period. The upper level forcing looks fairly weak, however, and at this time it doesn't look like there's going to be much precip associated with these systems. We'll continue to monitor the events as we get closer to the present day because there's more uncertainty the further out we get. For the long-term period, there's a greater chance for above normal precip in the northern portion of the area than the southern, based mainly on the positioning of a low early in the period.
I think we can finally declare this La Nina over and done with. I will have to check and see if this will officially be ruled La Nina based on the criteria. But as we move into the spring and summer, neutral conditions look likely. Here's the probabilistic ENSO forecast from the Climate Prediction Center for the mid-January forecast. It's looking like most of our summer will remain in neutral. There is talk of swinging back to an El Nino next fall and winter, but it really is too soon to tell, and from my understanding, this is not a great time of year to make that prediction. As we start coming out of spring, we can discuss this more. Our February outlook from the CPC shows a hint of dryness along the Atlantic coast and inland from there. As Chris showed, early February looks kind of dry. Long-range models show it being more active getting into the middle of February. We will just have to see. I'd lean more towards normal for most of the southeast at this point. Our spring flood outlook is suggesting that. Our seasonal outlook is hedging towards dry also, but for a much greater portion of the southeast. Even a little drier wouldn't be bad with all the recent flooding we have experienced. However, we still have a concern for the reservoirs at the top of basins to get recharged. It may not affect our flooding potential in the southeast, but will have a much bigger impact coming out of the spring if these reservoirs have not filled. The May through July outlook shows normal, which means equal chances of above normal, near normal, or below normal. This is consistent with the neutral end conditions and is not unexpected at all. So, our spring flooding potential looks normal for all of the reasons mentioned in the Water Resources Outlook. Jeff showed the climatology earlier, and that is a good reference to look at as we describe normal. We expect some flooding during the winter into spring season. If we see very little flooding, that would be below normal. If we see extensive flooding, that lasted much of the winter into springs, that would be above normal. So in describing our spring flood outlook as normal, we will have some occasional flooding in the southeast into March and April. So the bottom line in the short term looks like normal rainfall, normal type flooding for the southeast. For the long term, possibly dry. I know that the Climate Prediction Center is hinting towards dry, but really trending towards normal, especially as we push through the winter and get into the spring. With the La Nina kind of falling apart and us being in more neutral conditions, it's very possible that we could really trend towards normal. Right now, there's, like when they talk about equal chances, we have a chance to go either way. So right now we're looking pretty close to normal. Our next Water Resources Outlook we plan to record on during the week of February 20th, but right around the 22nd. Have a great month.